those little green dots on the bottom of the screen.
So you turned it down?
I turned it up a little bit because we're further from the mics than we would usually be. I don't like sitting like that either. Like all hunched over the mic like this, yeah.
Hey,
I suppose it works though.
That's why we're mobile.
We're going to get spinal issues.
Hey, there he is.
Rob, can you hear us here?
Rob. I can, yeah. Sorry, I was having issues with my browser.
Oh, think nothing of it, please. Think nothing of it, please. We actually had everything, set up and recording and all that stuff as we were still plugging in microphones. So
got it.
We're not the most overly produced show on the planet here. We try to keep things pretty simple.
I love it. That's great.
So we were just kicking off. The episode, and I'll just go very high level, and then ask you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
So
yeah. Well, with the introduction, just it would probably be better to do that via questions rather than like sort of an elevator pitch, because that's usually customized. You know what I mean, for like what the audience is, and in this particular case, I want to make sure it meets your needs.
I appreciate that. As a true sales consultant, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so Rob, this is episode 50 of TriangleCast, right? And
nice.
I'm Jason Juneau. We've met before. To my left is Corey Jeffries.
How's it going?
Hey, good, thanks.
And for any new listeners out there, the podcast, what we do here is our motto is bend, break, and hack, right? We look at all the traditional rules and who's succeeding by breaking those rules, right? So the rules are, for instance, get good grades, go to college, work really hard so you can get an entry-level job, right? And what you find is there's a lot of people that they don't necessarily take that path and they succeed. So we're trying to learn from them and see, well, what can you bend a little bit? What can you hack to make things work without going the traditional route? So the podcast itself is completely bootstrapped. We like to bring in people that have fresh ideas. We cater towards entrepreneurs and people that, they're not looking for the average 9-to-5 sort of lifestyle.
Right.
One of the topics that people have a lot of interest in is sales. So Corey, who's my co-host here, he is a dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneur. He started a bounce house company here in Raleigh. Started with one bounce house, and then later got a few more and began to automate a bunch of processes. So now the guy doesn't actually have to do much work towards that. He just gets texts that tell him when money's gone into his bank account. And I found that fascinating. We kept having these great conversations, and then eventually we stuck some microphones in front of us. And that's how TriangleCast was born. But what we uncovered also was that a lot of entrepreneurs that know how to start a business and have that mental fortitude, they don't know much about sales.
Yeah, it's true. That's absolutely true. And it's a shortcoming that needs to be addressed, because if you don't know, if you're not particularly good at marketing yourself, then people won't have a good sense of why they should be working with you.
No.
Whether a customer or prospect, or in many cases, you miss out on even referrals that you might have gotten from your family because they don't know what you do.
That's right.
That's true.
That's right. And you've probably seen it executed pretty poorly as well, where somebody doesn't know how to resonate with others.
Exactly, and that's unfortunate, because when that happens, it's just all it is missed opportunities. And I'm guilty of it too. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I haven't made those mistakes, because there's no question in my mind that I have. I remember one day when I was doing more career coaching type stuff, my grandmother was really concerned because she thought I was spinning my wheels and not making enough money, et cetera, which in many respects she was right at that I was. But she didn't really have a good sense of what I did. And it was kind of funny, actually. But here's my 96-year-old grandmother in a wheelchair across the table from me. And she looks at me at one point, and she got this like brilliant idea in her eyes. Her eyes just lit up, and she's like, "Oh," she goes, "You should go talk to one of those career coaches." I'm like, "Grant, that's what I do." It was pretty funny, but it was, that's why I say I'm guilty of that too, because it happens. You think you're doing a good job and you think people know what you're up to, and maybe they don't. Or a lot of times people will, they'll be overly general in their sales approach. They'll say, well, it's, you ask them who their product's for. There's like, it's for everybody. No, I'm sorry, it's not.
Yeah, they don't have any target market or target list or anything like that, right?
Exactly.
So I'm sorry that you missed the compliment before you dialed in. I was telling Corey, so I've been in sales for about 17 years, and that was everything from starting in retail, going through to more B2B and high-level, high-trust services and things like that. And I was telling Corey that your sales training and your approach to it is one of the best I've ever seen. It resonates. Yeah.
Yeah, that means a lot, because I did not. This is not something that I did naturally, and that's the thing that I always emphasize with people. And I don't know if I shared. I may or may not have shared when I did the training for your company. My background in terms of getting an interview. It took me 80 interviews to get my first job. Wow. Because I was so bad at selling myself. 80 interviews over the course of a year, and then Leo Burnett, the company that finally hired me, had rejected me the year before, and it took 23 interviews and 4 rounds at the company before they actually said, okay, we get it. And it wasn't their fault. It was my fault. I just wasn't doing a good job of telling my story.
So what changed? What changed either from storytelling techniques, or how did you present yourself differently that was more persuasive or compelling to them?
Well, what it was about was, it goes back to what I call, evidence-based selling. People have to look at you and think, wow, if Jason could do that for them, think what he could do for us. And the problem is that almost never the response that people get based on what we say, because we're too general in what it is that we say and do. So for example, the best way to illustrate this is like, there's a woman that I was interviewing, and she, I remember her distinctly. She was not the typical polished Leo Burnett type, but I really liked her experiences and some of the stories that she had shared. Well, fast forward a couple of weeks, when the company brought me down, and they're like, we're a little bit concerned about this because you recommended hiring this woman and no one recommended her. And they said, this was so out of character for you. And, talk to us about this. And I'm thinking, here at the time, I'm 23 years old, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, what kind of a mistake did I make? But when they slid the file across the desk, I said, oh, I remember her completely. I said, here's why I recommended hiring her. She came up with an idea to change the way they ship oil on a river on the East Coast as an intern. And this company was on target to save several $1 million that year just using her idea. I said, there are people who go their entire career and never have an accomplishment like that.
No.
And I'll never forget, the woman looks at me and she goes, good for you for finding that out, and shame on her for not telling anybody about it. In a full day of interviews from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night, I was the only person she mentioned that to. Yeah, and I was, but like I said, I was guilty of that too, because I didn't share specifics with people. You have to tell a story. People have to look at you and say, I remember Jason, he's the guy who, and then fill in that sentence.
Right. So, hey, Rob, so what's the difference? I mean, how do you pick out that particular story that you want to sell? Because I have plenty of stories, and I spoke with Jason, and he's pulled out a lot of stories out of me. And, his favorite story, of course, is my bounce house story, how I automated, a company, and I still work a 9 to 5. So how would you recommend someone, tell their best story?
Or find what's going to be most appealing?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. Now, everybody's got one. That's the interesting thing.
Right.
That it's just a matter of, Aldous Huxley once said, human beings have an unlimited capacity for taking things for granted. I would take that a step further. We have an unlimited capacity for taking ourselves for granted. And what happens is that what we do is we just say to ourselves, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. I was just doing the job I got paid to do. And as an example, there was a woman that I worked with who was an event planner. And Jason, you may remember, I'm pretty sure I shared this with you guys. This woman, her resume, the first 3 bullets on the resume were not good stories at all. They were responsibilities. It was negotiated with unions, worked with hotels and convention centers, booked speakers. And it's like yawn, yawn, and yawn again. That's your job. All you did was give me a job description, which doesn't separate you from anybody else. And so I asked her, I said, what are you most proud of? That's always a good question to start with. And she didn't want to brag, because a lot of people don't want to brag. There's a difference, though, and the distinction that I want people to remember is it isn't bragging if you did it. Bragging, and it isn't bragging if you stick to the facts. Bragging is adding lots of stupid adjectives about proven track record and how wonderful you are. Bragging is not saying, here's the challenge, this is what I did, this is what happened, and here's the impact that it had. That's factual. You can, as the listener, can make your own determination of whether that was fantastic or whether it was the worst thing ever. I don't really care what you think as a listener. I mean, I do care, but it's up to you to interpret that. Not up to me to sit there and say, oh, I was God's gift to that company and they were really lucky to have me. Yeah, that would be bragging. But so I asked the woman, I said, what are you most proud of? And she looked at me, and it took a while for her to come up with this because she was so reluctant to talk about herself. She said, I'm most proud of the fact that I've never gone over budget and I've never missed a deadline. I said, do you have numbers to back that up? And she said, yeah. She said, I kept a file for every event. I said, good, make a list. So she made a list. And I said, here's, and then, we talked about, quantify this. What was the biggest event? What was the smallest event? What was the one you had the longest time to plan? What was the one that you had the shortest time to plan? What are all the things that, the facts around it? And when she came back 2 weeks later, she looked at me, she said, Rob, I was shocked. I never added any of this up before. Her largest event over 8 years was for 20,000 people. And she was in charge of it. Okay, that's a huge thing. I don't need to, there's a lot of questions I no longer have to ask her. I'm not going to be the guy who's like, well, my daughter's getting married in 3 months and we're going to have 200 people. Can you handle it? Yeah, I think so. I don't need to go there. So as an interviewer, it's really helpful when people quantify stuff like that. But the really big quantifier that blew her mind, and mine too, is the fact that she had, over 8 years, saved her company $1 million by coming in at or under budget. Well, do the math. That's an average of $125,000 a year. And then when we did the math on her average salary over that period of time, her average salary was $75,000 a year. So she was saving them $50,000 a year more than they paid her.
Wow.
It's an investment, not an expense. And you know what? She got laid off in the height of the recession, in the first big recession that we had, back in the late 90s. Well, she would never have been laid off if they had known that, but she had 3 different bosses and no one had any idea, and she wasn't marketing herself on the job. Marketing yourself is not something that salespeople have to do when they're trying to get new customers. It's not something that people have to do when they're trying to get a job. When you get a job, the job of marketing yourself has only just begun. Now, you don't want to be that awful employee who's always highlighting every little thing that you've done, but keep your own track record of it.
Well, I'm even thinking, for entrepreneurs like Corey, for instance. So what we've pulled so far from you is so tell a story and quantify.
Yes. So, I need to know, okay, so entrepreneur thing, let's talk about that because that's important. Your job as a salesperson, your most important job, whether you're a job hunter, salesperson, entrepreneur, whatever, is to take risk out of the equation for the people you are trying to attract. Mm-hmm. So risk for a potential customer looks like, well, Corey, this is great that you're doing it, but is this a hobby? Are you going to be doing it 6 months from now? And then, or if you're not, am I going to be forced to look for somebody else? People don't want to go there. They don't want to take risk. Nobody wants to be part of your experiment. So, they have to believe that what you're doing makes sense. It's the next logical step in your professional and personal development, and that they're not taking a risk if they work with you. So then how do you then describe why are you doing what you're doing? What, how did you get into it? If they don't know anything about you, you may have to get into a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. Let them know what you've done, quantify your track record to the degree that you can. What are the things that you've done along the way? Now, a lot of people spend time apologizing for the things that they didn't do, which is a big mistake. Because candidly, I don't want, even as a potential customer, I don't necessarily want to work with a person who's done it 1,000 times because they probably haven't been there, done that attitude. I would be much more enthusiastic about working with somebody who was, where they hadn't done it maybe at the level I needed them to, but they were excited about being given a chance to do it. And I hesitate to say giving a chance because nobody gives chances. You have to earn it. Mm-hmm. But, if you have proven that I'm not taking a risk, and this is the next logical step for you. You just haven't done it yet at that level. I'm totally there because you're going to put more energy into it than if you had done it 500 times before. If that's coming across, if you're passionate and enthusiastic and you're resourceful and you demonstrate all the qualities that nobody could teach you, then I'm on board. If none of that comes across, then I don't care. Then I'll find somebody else.
So even applying that to, again, for instance, Corey, like I think if the guy's in the bounce house business and I'm a customer and I've spent money to make sure this thing is at my daughter's first birthday, which is a big deal. There's guests, there's other people's kids, there's all this stuff going on.
Your neighbors.
There's neighbors, yeah, right. So I mean, there's social aspects to that. There's my wife depending on me, like, hey, did you order this thing or not? So like what you really want to know is, number one, nobody's going to hurt themselves on it. It's going to show up on time and all that kind of stuff. Which I did rent from Corey. Well, Corey let me have a bounce house for my kid's birthday, and all that stuff did turn out well. So I'm not saying that, but almost as part of his story, it's like, well, how many birthdays has he brought these things to, and they've shown up on time, and everybody had a great time. And that's
exactly.
If I'm hearing what you're saying correctly.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I want to know, and maybe it's a testimonial from a past client or something like that. But somebody, I want to know there's that credibility factor that they're going to be there, because
it's not fly by night.
Right. If it's their kid's birthday, they don't want to take the risk that, the clown's not going to show up, or the bounce house isn't going to be there, or the cake isn't there. Yeah. Because no parent wants to have that conversation, I'm sure. Yeah. So that's what risk looks like. Yeah. And so how do you convince them, and if you can understand that and sell to that, because people buy emotionally. So, you could say, hey, I'm thinking of this from your point of view. I know this is a big deal for you. You want it to go off without a hitch. You want to know for sure I'm going to be there and that this is going to work and that the insurance stuff's all covered. What evidence then can you put out there to support that that's the case? That's the evidence. It doesn't have to be a full-on, story with tons and tons and tons of details. It's just enough to get somebody to nod their head and go, okay, cool, I got the right guy.
Now, what was it about the sales side of things that appealed to you, or how did you make the journey into sales training?
Well, it was not a journey that I expected to make. It was something, literally a career that picked me. And so what happened was, after I got the job at Burnett, I told you what a headache that was trying to get that. I made a commitment to help people who were genuinely interested in advertising at first, because I knew how much I wanted that job and I knew how hard it was. Because literally, Burnett got resumes from, I think, 20,000 unsolicited resumes a year and only hired 40 people. So the competition was pretty tough. And they actively recruited on 40 campuses, and half of those people were MBAs that they hired. So you were really, if you didn't have an MBA, you were one of 20 that they might hire. So I knew how much I wanted that, and when I started helping people, it became more than just people wanting to get into advertising. It was people who wanted to get into, like, literally anything, any career you could name. Over the years, I've helped people with everything from a Hollywood, script supervisor to, MTV DJs and stuff like that. So lots of, I've worked with lots of different industries, engineers, attorneys. And so that led to a book. The book led to a lot of speaking, and it was somebody who had seen and worked with me at another company who recruited me into sales training. She's like, Rob, you'd be great at this. And I literally had never thought about it. And I'm grateful to her every day because, it literally changed my life. So it's pretty cool thing.
What was the title of the book?
It's called Getting Your Foot in the Door When You Don't Have a Leg to Stand On. Mm-hmm. And McGraw-Hill put it out a couple of years ago. It went through 4 printings. It's currently out of print. I've been, half-heartedly shopping around for a different publisher. It actually did pretty well. There was, without any effort at all, there were about 11 schools that started using it as a textbook. And I even got a letter from one school that said, we used to use What Color Is Your Parachute, which is the top-selling book in the category. And they said, our teachers and our students like yours a lot better. And I showed that to McGraw-Hill, and McGraw-Hill could have cared less. They were like, yeah, whatever. Which, now that to me is classic sales mistake. If you come to, if you've got a stable of books and somebody says, hey, something on your current shelf can potentially outsell the best-selling book in the category, one would think that would warrant investment. But publishers are basically printers, and they don't think like marketers. They were so not strategic, they didn't even send my book to libraries for review in time. Wow. Which you would think a publisher would do that. So, I mean, just because that's why you have to be careful. Like when you hook up, from a marketing standpoint with people, you would like to think that just by nature of the industry they're in, that they're good marketers. Not at all. Most people are terrible marketers. And, and McGraw-Hill is no different than anybody else. In fact, believe it or not, I'm actually grateful to McGraw-Hill because my book was originally purchased by NTC Contemporary, and McGraw-Hill bought NTC before my book came out. They could have scrapped it, but they didn't. And the fact that they didn't changed my life. The fact that they didn't support it was a bit frustrating, but still, there's a level of credibility that comes with that that led to what I'm doing now. So I'm actually very grateful.
So have you thought about going the self-publishing route? Maybe next go round, or
I did it actually before McGraw-Hill bought it. I did it as that way, and I would not recommend that at all. It does not carry the same credibility. And now today it's a lot cheaper. At the time, it was a money pit because you couldn't do it electronically,
right? And
so that took a long time to recover from that mistake. But I would not recommend that at all.
Okay, and so it doesn't sound like your book was a single book. You had different, maybe different courses within inside the book or something of that nature. Is that?
Yeah, well, it was one. It was one book, and it covered all aspects of the job search. But then subsequently, I wrote a number of ebooks, and those are still available online and whatnot.
Where can people find them?
Amazon, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're on Amazon. You'd have to look down to maybe the 2 or 3 millionth ranking.
Hey, look, ours is probably under that. Corey and I wrote one too, and it's probably even lower down than that.
Yeah. So we're in the half that makes the top half possible.
That's funny. I like that. That's very positive.
It is.
Yes.
One of the things that I heard you, and I never heard anybody else say this before, but you referred to yourself as a sales nerd.
Oh, yeah, I was pretty much joking around, but the truth is, I'm passionate about this. A lot of people have told me, that they've been through, you had mentioned earlier that you really enjoy the training.
Yeah. I enjoy process. Like I enjoy what's, why does it work and how do you hack it to make it better? So I never knew until I heard you say it, but I think I'm a sales nerd as well. So that's one of the reasons why I ask. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's perfect. Because that helps me, because I was trying to figure out what the nature of the question was, in terms of what inspired you to ask that. Yeah, so that's it exactly. That I love to know, I was a psych major undergrad, and I might have gone on, at one point I actually thought about becoming like a psychologist or whatever, but it's, 8 years of school potentially at the time. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. But I love the how the brain works and how people think and whatnot. So to be able to apply that every day to the different selling challenges, it's really powerful. It's that's the nerd part, or the geek part, or however you want to think of it, is really just like you said. It's how do I decode the challenge? And as an example, something I'm really proud of, something that happened just last week. A year ago, I had done a ride along with a company, and they're a retail organization, and the salespeople I was working with were, what they did, their job is to convince competitive retailers to join their family, which you can appreciate from a selling challenge. That's a big deal because when somebody opens a franchise type operation, they've made a major financial and time commitment. And there's this one group of stores that they had tried for years to get these 5 stores to convert and had never had any luck. And one of the reasons they didn't have any luck was because they were run by the son of a couple of people who had spent actual time on the board of directors of the other company. So, I mean, if you want to talk about a difficult selling challenge, that would be it. And we got there, and we went to the meeting with these folks, and I'm watching their process, the people that I'm coaching, and they were going about it all wrong. They were doing it from their point of view. Literally, the guy walked into the meeting and he said, my boss wants me to get these stores converted before the end of the year. I cringed. What are you talking about? But I didn't say anything in the moment. But when we got back into the car, I looked at him and I said, who was that about? And he goes, well, that was about us. And I said, yeah, that's exactly backwards. They don't care what your goals are. They care what their goals are. And so long story short, by really looking at what their goals were, and by listening and asking questions and doing that, we turned things around. The next day we got a follow-up appointment with them, which was amazing, and 3 of the store owners. And last week I got an email from the guy saying that they just signed the documents a week ago to convert these 5 stores, which I can honestly tell you, based on the fact that they had been doing the same thing year after year after year and it wasn't making any difference, that changing the strategy, I'm really proud of the fact that I helped them see a way in that turned into something they're going to make. They made so much money on that one conversion that I bet you they made 10 times what they paid on that, at least probably more. In fact, I'm sure it was more because those stores are really profitable. So, that's the kind of thing when I talk about being, a sales geek, it's my passion for how do we figure this out? How do we make this work? And get to the psychology. So that's a long-winded answer. I hope that was not too much for you.
No, it's outstanding, and it's what we're looking for, right? I can't, I'm only just by nature of Corey and starting this podcast and some of the ways we've looked into monetization. This is my venture into entrepreneurship, right? And as far as the sales side of things goes, like I've been helping him as much as I could on that side of things, at least on here's how to think about it, right? Or here's what people hear when you say different things to them, or here's who would be concerned or would be, part of your target list, for instance. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily even have that basic blocking and tackling from a sales standpoint, let alone the higher end strategies or, to your point, the psychology of it. But yet they're still succeeding. So that on its own is fascinating.
Yeah. So Rob, what would you say percentage-wise of a strategy or a sales process is the psychological portion?
Wow. I hadn't ever actually thought about it that way. Well, you have to have the process in terms of, so I'm going to go with the process being an important percentage, maybe 10 to 20%. You can't do it without it. Right. So it's not like you could have all the psychology, and if you have all the psychology, no process, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
But I'm going to say 80-20. Yeah. So 80%, psychology and the strategy and whatnot. And I'll give, let me give you an example of that, to talk about how important the process part actually is. And Jason, you might have heard me share this example before as well. One of my buddies is literally the best sales guy I've ever met in my life. And he joined a software company, and he spent his whole career doing software sales and 6 and 7 and 8 figure implementations. And when he got to this one company, he asked, how long was the sales process? And, in terms of, that's the formal, that would be, part of that 20% we were talking about. But this is just a really good example of how important that is. So he was finding that people were, the other salespeople on the team were spending 6, 9, 12 months, usually 9 to 12 months before they got to even a no-go or go decision in terms of moving forward. So literally what that meant is they're working with prospects for the better part of a year and then finding out it's not going to work. And so he said to himself, well, that's ridiculous. Let's figure out a way to change that. And so what he realized was the reason that was happening was because there were decision makers and people who were getting involved in the process later. And so he put together a questionnaire, literally a 14-page questionnaire, knowing that no one person on the team would be able to answer all the questions. He made his prospects fill it out before he even would meet with them. Now think about that from a psychology standpoint. Most salespeople are so desperate, for a meeting, they'll do anything, and they bring donuts and do all kinds of stupid stuff that has no value whatsoever. And here's a guy who says, no, my time's really valuable, and so is your time. And so let's, if this isn't going to work, let's not screw around for a year and figure that out. Let's do something different, And so the clients went along with it. The prospects went along with it. And And he got, tons of points. People thanked him for it because basically he's saying, your time's valuable, my time's valuable. Let's make this as efficient as we possibly can. And, good for him, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what it takes. To give you evidence that actually works, I've known this guy for over 20 years. Every 2 years, he takes off and goes sailing because he makes so much money. So he works for 2 years, and then when the money starts to, then he goes sailing. And then when money starts to run low, he goes and gets another job. Not too many people are that successful.
That's pretty successful for me.
Yeah. And that's also, it's interesting when we talk about like the breaking of the rules, that is very much against the normal. Hey, you work this 9 to 5 until you're too old to work anymore. And then you actually take some time off to enjoy your life. And it sounds like that guy has figured out some of the secret sauce to get around that.
Exactly. And that's important. Yeah. I for one, have no interest in 9 to 5 anyway, for a number of reasons. But yeah, it's and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Jason, about that whole idea of, how do you crack the code and do things a little bit differently? And different is not gimmicky. This is not doing your, company brochure on paper with pressed flowers and a hint of jasmine. It's something that has some value and some reason for being. In fact, the other thing that the guy said, and talk about the psychology and process, marriage of this, he would often tell the people that he was calling on, he'd say, my job is to qualify you out of this opportunity as quickly as possible. Which is, again, not something that you would hear the average salesperson say. I personally, and now a little fair warning, I couldn't do that and not come across like a jerk.
Yeah, me neither.
But he's a real charming guy, and he can pull that off. And so a lot of that is, knowing what you're capable of personally and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. But what does work in any shape or form that you can adapt to your own approach is confidence in presence. That's what he's demonstrating. So however you demonstrate confidence and presence, that's what it needs to look like.
So that I like that strategy because it's more of a, hey, you possibly may not qualify for this product or this service, and it's more so that customer or that lead doesn't want to feel left out, or it's like, hey, I have to have that now because you're kind of taking it away from me, and now I want it. Is that
exactly? Yeah, there's part of the fear of missing out. Now that's actually not even why he's doing it, but that does work. And the funny thing is, it works like even better than you would expect it. Like there was a guy, I'll never forget this. There was a guy that had wanted to work with me, and shame on me, I wasted way too much time. And in fact, my roommate at the time had overheard the conversation, and she's like, "Why didn't you hang up on that guy like an hour ago?" And he was in the problem, and it was more of a challenge. But he kept questioning my credentials, and he's like, "Well, okay, so how are you?" Because he didn't. For whatever reason, he didn't think that I was going to be the right person or whatever. And finally, I stopped the conversation and said, look, I said, it's clear to me that you've got enough questions that this isn't going to be a good investment for you because you're going to be questioning yourself and me at every stage. And that doesn't make any sense. I said, I don't have any interest in that. I said, you owe it to yourself to find somebody that you're absolutely comfortable with because clearly you're not comfortable with me. And at that point, he started backing off. He's like, no, I really want to work with you. And I'm like, no, too late. I'm done. You've literally spent, 60 to 90 minutes questioning my credentials. I'm not interested. I'm gonna trust your gut because your gut was the one that led you to lead all those questions, and your gut is actually telling you not to work with me. So let's not do this. And then it was over. And he was bummed because, I don't know if he was just highly insecure or what his deal was, but he actually blew it. But it was really interesting to your point. From a psychology standpoint, he was trying to convince me so hard at the end to work with him. I'm like, look, I'm not going to take your money. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. And I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I just literally, his gut was telling him don't. So either he needs to get clear on that or whatever, but I'm not going to be party to that discussion.
Yeah, and I like that kind of stuff. And it's almost, there's a bit of a kung fu to it, right? There's a bit of a technique to it. And even though that wasn't that wasn't an intentional takeaway. It was unintentionally you being honest, and also the thing I like about it is it's very human. It's, I think people get themselves in trouble when they build themselves a pitch and they build themselves a process that they absolutely have to stick to. And they also, put pressure on themselves, whether that's a quota or, something else that comes unnatural to them. When anytime I've ever been successful, it's because I can have a very a very human and honest conversation with people.
Exactly. And if what you're representing, selling, whatever, doesn't lend itself to that, then you owe it yourself to find something else, because there's going to be so much disconnect and so much, the word that's coming to mind, I don't know if it's an actual word, but like disharmony, that internally, that you're not going to feel good about yourself. Life goes a lot more smoothly when you're not swimming upstream.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good segue to talk about the most common mistakes. I know you've been in front of a lot of different organizations. You've met hundreds, if not thousands, of salespeople, probably some business owners. What are the common mistakes that you see people make that you just have to say, stop it right now, don't ever do it again?
Well, sadly, some of those mistakes are not things that companies are actually willing to correct, because there's two different categories that you were just talking about. So let's talk about what those categories are. First, for the salespeople, not the owners of the company, but the other folks who are representing it. The biggest mistakes that they make that are the ones that are in their blind spots, where they're using language that doesn't support or actually undermines what it is that they're trying to do. And one of the examples that I know that we talked about with your team, Jason, was when people say, I think excessively. I watched one guy pitching a huge, commercial banking relationship that would have been, hundreds of millions of dollars, in terms of, what they would have been, that's what was at stake. And the guy started out and said, I think we put together a proposal you're really going to like. I think we're going to be able to help you hit your goals next year. I think. He said,
I do that still.
Yeah. And that's one thing that, that would go under that category that you were just talking about of stop, because when you say, I think,
Oh, Rob, I think we're losing you a little bit.
Oh, you got it.
Here we go.
There we go.
We can hear you again.
Yeah, it's a little bit like looking at somebody and saying, hey, it's your money, give it a shot. It's because you're saying, I'm not confident. And people, that goes back to the psychology, because people don't know, they can't necessarily articulate it, but they respond to it because they do perceive it. The prospect at the end of that conversation, his exact words, and I will never, ever forget them, were, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm not feeling confident moving forward. I'm like, hey, I can put my finger on it. The guy selling me is not confident. And so literally months and months of work by the entire team got thrown out the window because the guy said, I think 8 times. There's no question in my mind that there wasn't anybody, on the prospect side who was aware of why they responded like that, but that's what happened. And there's no question in my mind, because that's predictable. When you don't have confidence, and it shows up in your language and it shows up in your physical presence, people perceive it and they respond to it.
Sorry, let me cut you off. So what would you replace I think with from a psychology standpoint?
So first of all, the good thing is you're not going to be able to change it instantly. You can't just say, okay, I'm never going to say that again, because you will catch yourself. And if you catch yourself and I say, hey, Corey, I think that I'm confident that we're going to be able to help you with this. Actually, in that correction, it's even more confident than if I had just said, Corey, I'm confident we're going to be able to help you with this. You're not going to say guarantee. You don't want to use legal language, but you could say, I'm confident. And I wouldn't say we feel or we believe, because those are weak. Also, those are first cousins of I think. So you have to be careful of what you say. I want to go back to the point that you just made, because you had asked about the other category. Here's the mistake that companies make that they don't realize that they're making. And some of them do, and some of them just don't care. But what they do is they set quotas based on the success of the previous year. Okay, well, yes, I get that to some degree, but think about this for a second. Let's say that you hit 120% of your quota this year. Okay, for a lot of companies, that then becomes your new 100%. So effectively, you are punishing top performers. Think about that. Because what you're saying is next year, you're going to have to work 20% as hard just to get to what your quota, was this year. And, in this year you were bonused on that extra 20%. Next year you won't be.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. They're saying we're punishing you for good work. Well done.
And it's like the assumption that you hadn't already worked as hard as you possibly could, right? Like, so where's that extra gonna come from?
Exactly. Well, I know a guy, he is the top, I don't think he still works for him, but he was the top salesperson in the world for a telecom company that you would have heard of because everybody knows them and they make cell phones and everything else. And the CFO brought him into the office one day and said, here's your quota for the next year. And the guy looked at the CFO and he goes, that is not doable. Now think about this. If you're talking about the top salesman in the world, this is not a guy, and I'm saying salesman instead of person because it was a guy, but this is not a guy who has a problem with initiative. This is not a guy that you have to, try to get out of the office. He's hustling his butt off already. And for some stupid CFO, to throw a number out because he promised it to the board, not knowing, what was doable and what wasn't because he's never carried a bag in his life, that's a stupid thing to do. And so what did he accomplish in that meeting? Less than nothing. What the guy did was he walked out of that meeting, the salesperson, and he started looking for another job. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Is that what you want to do to the people who are bringing in more money to your company than anybody else, out of your 50,000 employees? Okay, if that isn't stupid, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What about any other don't do's, right? So we know to remove I think from language. Is there any other from individual salesperson, which again, some of the entrepreneurs we've met, they might have a company that only has 20 people, or they might be a solopreneur, right? They're the only person doing all of it.
Right. So here's the thing. It's not really a don't do this thing, but there's a belief that if you are in sales, you are being paid to speak. That's backwards. If you believed you were being paid to listen, you'd make more money. Mm-hmm. So that your job is not to go in and talk and convince people. Your job is to go in and listen to what the problems are, and then be a true friend and consultant and look at the person and say, yes, I can help you with that, or no, I can't. It goes back to, Jason, what you were talking about earlier, that that honesty factor. To be able to look at somebody with absolute integrity and say, you know what, I'm not your best choice, is actually a really powerful statement. And you'll probably get more referrals from that than you would if you went in and tried to pretend to be somebody that you're not.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of or read the Challenger sale?
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah, I've read the book and all that. So, I could talk about that, but what specific question or thought did you have around that?
I guess for me more, and then maybe we had talked about some of the things to avoid, and maybe we could go into some best practices. The other thing is that I know people can pay to hire you as a sales consultant, so we're in no way asking you to give away your secret sauce, right? But just more, maybe some high-level best practices. And, people hear me talk all day long about, times when I've seen things executed really well, but I was going to use an example from that. And
okay. Good. So Challenger's fine. Challenger's interesting. Is there validity to it? Absolutely. There's, Challenger, in a way that my friend that I was talking to you about earlier, he's a bit of that because he is not afraid to engage in a conversation with people and challenge them in a healthy way, not challenging them in a, okay, how can you be so stupid? Why are you doing this? That's not the conversation. It's more about, hey, have you thought about this? What about that? And to engage in more of an intellectual sparring partner sort of relationship. So that's at the height and in perfection, a good world. That's what the Challenger sale is all about. And the good part of that is the willingness to be able to look up and care enough about somebody's business that you can potentially offer an insight. Challenge with that from a sales point of view is a couple things. First of all, it's a rare salesperson who knows more about somebody's business than they do. And it's hard to have any credibility around that. Also, because with the internet, customers have way more access to information. They don't rely on salespeople for information the way they used to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's challenging in that regard. It still can be done, but it's challenging. Now, the downside of the challenger philosophy is that if you read the book, they would have you believe that all of the best salespeople are challengers.
Not true.
That's not true. In fact, they categorized it, and what they don't talk about is that 60% of the top salespeople fall into the other three categories that they talked about, 3 or 4 categories, like lone wolf and all the other ways that they described other salespeople. Meaning that you can have a lot of different styles and be successful. You don't have to be one. The odds are, 40% of the best salespeople are challengers. That is the biggest category, representation, but it's not the only way to do it.
Yeah, I've seen some people that I would almost classify them as like technicians. They simply commit to the activity, they train themselves, and they might not even have a lot of charisma. They might not really be able to read their audience that well, but because they've committed to the science of the sale, they still succeed.
Yeah.
It's not me. It's not, I'm not great at that aspect of it. But yeah, I don't think anybody should ever be intimidated to try.
No, certainly not. And if you, not every customer is a good customer. So if your intention is pure and you're trying to help somebody with their business and they're reacting negatively, look for a different customer. Don't beat your head against the wall.
Yeah, I agree with that. So maybe we probably only have a few more minutes left. There was one thing that I wanted to run by you and see what your thoughts were on that. And then we were going to ask you maybe what your favorite quote is. So I'm just giving you some time to prepare for that question. So I had mentioned earlier that Corey and I we were taking a little break. So there's been a little bit of a break between episode 49 and episode 50 where we were talking about monetization. And one of our theories is that a lot of salespeople have drive time that becomes unproductive time. Maybe they're making phone calls, maybe they're listening to podcasts, maybe they're listening to music, right? And then productive time in the office is then turned into training time. One of the things that Corey and I were talking about was working with some small companies directly with, either the VP of business development, that kind of thing, and deploying sales training in podcast form, and then using, so, when people are actually driving or they're washing the dishes or whatever, they can be training themselves on the sales side of things, keeping on message with their clients. And then when they're back in the office, that's the time to assess, did they retain what they've learned, or to go over the retention part. And I'm looking for your honest feedback on this. Do you think that's a good idea, bad idea, or what kind of things do you think we'll run into from a challenge standpoint?
And just to touch on that, one of the reasons why is we looked into adult learning and how much data or how much listening can one adult really retain. And one of our ideas was to break it down into 5 or 15-minute segments per session so that they could retain that information more so over time versus getting like a 1-hour session where they're probably only going to retain about 10 minutes of that information. So just to kind of add some context to that as well.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm all about sustainment in various forms because you can't do a one and done, like a single training. If the company doesn't invest in sustainment, which is a mistake, the individuals should certainly be doing something to practice because for themselves. So the idea of a podcast or, an email, quiz or something like that, there's lots of different ways that you can do it to keep the material fresh, the most important thing is that people practice their craft. So identifying what they need to do, challenges around resolving objections or whatever it happens to be, and actually practice that because you can't intellectualize it and go, oh, okay, I get the concept. I see what I'm supposed to do and say, all right, and then expect yourself to execute that perfectly. That would be like, somebody trying to show you how to do, a complicated dive off a diving board. And then you thinking that, okay, now that you know the mechanics of it, that you can just join the Olympic team.
Yep.
it doesn't work that way.
So kind of the hands-on approach. More
yeah. So what you're talking about is great. I like that idea.
It's one of we had been working on a couple of different things, but I just thought your input as a sales consultant and trainer would be very valuable on that. So yeah, that's one of the ideas we've been toying around with. Favorite quotes? Is there? I know one of the ones that I've heard you say before and a little bit today is it ain't bragging if it's true.
Right. Yeah. Dizzy Dean. Yeah. It ain't bragging if you can do it.
That's what it was.
There's a lot of them. That's a big one. I actually collect quotes, so it's hard to come up with an absolute favorite quote. The Aldous Huxley one that I talked about before, human beings have an unlimited capacity for taking things for granted, is definitely one of them. On a more humorous note, my grandfather had a great quote that he used to say, and I've never heard it from anybody else, but he used to say, and it's just to keep things light. He said, "It's one of the great biological wonders of the world that there are more horses' asses than there are horses." Which totally cracks me up. So there's he also had another one which is interesting, and this is a good one for salespeople too. Although he was speaking about it, he was an attorney. He said, "You have no idea how much money I make telling people to just shut up."
As a sales trainer?
Yeah, he was talking about it as an attorney, but as a sales trainer, there's a part of me that's doing that a lot as well.
That's funny.
Stop talking. Yeah.
I think I like that one even better than the horse's ass one.
Yeah. Yeah, he died when I was like 6. I wish I had known him because he had so many. Our extended family quotes him all the time because there were so many things that he used to say that were just a really very bright, witty guy.
Yeah, he sounds pretty awesome.
All right, Rob. Well, I guess I have one last thing for you. And I guess this would be more so for our listeners. I know it's easy to sell water to a well when you're confident. What piece of information would you give our listeners in being more confident as a salesperson, or just going out of the way? Like, what confident piece of advice would you give to be confident?
I'd say really trust yourself. What's fascinating to me is that most of the issues that people have is stem from the fact that they don't trust themselves and they're overthinking things too much. So that if you are super passionate about a product or service and you know that it's going to help people, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your potential customers to view it as the gift that it is. Because think about it, if I'm your customer or a potential customer and you're helping me solve a problem that I've got, I want to talk to you. But I want to talk to you knowing that you're feeling good and confident about it. And think about this. If you already knew that it was going to work as a salesperson, you knew that the person needed it and that they were going to be, you had a crystal ball and that they were going to be so much better off for having worked with you, you would approach that conversation with a lot more confidence because it's almost like, it's a foregone conclusion. Well, that's pretty much what you should do anyway, because if you believe in the product and it does work, why wouldn't you do that? Why are you tiptoeing around apologizing and asking for permission and doing all kinds of other stupid stuff that blows your credibility and credentials when you should be confidently saying, hey, you don't have to use the exact words. In fact, I wouldn't use the words, but the intention has to be, I've got this gift for you. Take a look at it and see if this makes sense. If it makes sense, let's work together. And if it doesn't, don't. So it's a combination of feeling like, being confident that you actually have something of value and not having any attachment. You can't make it mean too much. Richard Gere, the actor, I read an interview with him one time, and I love what he said. He said his approach to auditioning changed, and his success rate changed when he stopped going in desperate for the opportunity. When he did the typical desperate actor thing, which is exactly how salespeople come across, by the way. He would walk into these auditions and it was like he had to have the part. Oh, you got to hire me. You got to hire me. That was what he was communicating, even though he wasn't saying those words. His energy put that out there. When he changed his approach and basically said, hey, my idea is I want to give the director an option. I want them to be able to look at me and say, yes, we could use him. He took the pressure off himself. He was no longer attached. And when he did that, he started getting at work.
Wow. That's
yeah, his acting skills didn't change. You know, he was obviously every bit as good an actor before as he was after. It was his approach. So that's what I would leave you with.
Rob, where can people find out more about you or contact you if they want you to train their team? How can people find you online?
Easiest way is just you can go. They can send me an email. ChicagoRob444@gmail is a good email address to reach me.
Okay.
That one doesn't get too much spam, so I'll know that it's legit.
Okay.
Somebody from some foreign country trying to put money in my account so that you can take it out.
Well, Rob, we really appreciate you coming on, and we just thank you for taking the time. We hope you have a great holiday. This episode will be published very likely this weekend. I think there's a lot of content here, so we're probably going to break it up into 2 parts.
Great. Sounds good. You know, the website, RobRyanSullivan.com would also be a good way to reach me, too.
Okay, so Rob Ryan Sullivan.
Yeah, it's more on the career side of things, but if you think about it, selling yourself is the most difficult selling challenge of all because you're the product and the salesperson. So it doesn't speak as much to the corporate side of what I do, but that just, you know, your listeners should be aware that that's most of what I do at this point.
Yeah, and we'll put links to those in the show notes for both episodes.
Good, I appreciate that.
That way people can find you. And yeah, and for our listeners out there, obviously you can always follow us on TriangleCast.com, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. All of those are at TriangleCast. And we thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Rob Sullivan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, nice to meet you, Corey. Take care, you guys.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.